DJ Lionessa. I'm one of the curators for this year's New Forms Festival, Transform. I wanted to thank you all for making the time today to come to this panel. We've put a lot of our heart and soul and time into crafting this conversation so we can have important dialogue, that is relevant to what's going on in the world right now. I won't be too long, but I'll just let you know that there is other programming going on downstairs right after this. Please stick around if you feel like it. There's an incredible lineup of Swana artists, local and out of town. So yeah, without further ado, I'll pass it off to Noor Ghazel, our moderator for the night.
Hi everyone, you can hear me okay? Awesome, okay. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really honored to be sharing space, not just with my panelists, but also with you all. We're gonna be having really important conversation, and especially important before going into a show. Before I start introducing our panelists, I do wanna do a land acknowledgement. We are sitting on unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands. And going beyond just acknowledgement, I always think about like, okay, we acknowledge like, what's the work like? What do we do now? And I think a part of that is having these conversations that might be a bit difficult, but very, very necessary. And also having them before having something like what we could call fun. I think it's important to go in with a consciousness about what it means to consume art. Not just on our end to create art, but what does it mean to consume it? That being said, I would like to introduce our panelists. Please bear with me, I'm gonna read their lovely bios. So first we have Rawan Hassan. Rawan is a Palestinian multidisciplinary artist, designer, and community worker. Her artistic practice reflects the Palestinian and Arab cultures. She draws on her Arab-Palestinian heritage and explores themes of futurism and sentimentality through tatriz, drawings, and poetry. Next we have, I'll go in order actually. Give me 1 sec. Next we have Jada Gabrielle Pape. Jada is a Coast Salish belonging to the Snuneymuxw, hopefully pronounced that right, and Sanish nations. She has family ties to both Musqueam and Squamish nations. Jada is a mixed media artist who creates weavings in cedar, wool, and cotton. She also paints in beads as a way to find calm in the storms. She's unwaveringly in solidarity with Palestine and has a lifelong commitment to resistance. Her own resistance to colonialism comes in the form of canoeing, drumming, and singing, and consistent, hopeful parenting. Jada is an anti-racism educator and a decolonizing consultant and a grief and trauma counselor. Next, we have Vanessa Fajemison. Awesome. I tried to practice it beforehand. Still got it wrong? I'm good? Okay, great. So Vanessa is a writer, DJ, and cultural curator living, working in, and playing in so-called Vancouver. Vanessa has been writing across art, digital culture, and critical thinking since 2019. Much of her practice explores the intersections between Blackness, visual media, music, various subcultures, and sociological theories. She's a senior writer for Tokyo-based magazine Sabukaru.online, a co-director of the Black Arts Center, and an artist-run center in Surrey, BC. She's also a resident of Accra-based online radio station, Oroko Radio, and a member of local collective Made by We. Next, we have Evidence Doll. Evidence Doll is a trans-mask DJ and performer blending hardcore, trance, Arabic beats, and experimental rhythms with a dance background and a cathartic relationship to their music. They have high energy sets, and their Arab roots and androgynous stage presence creates transformative and identity-driven experiences. And last but not least, we have Nanous, who is joining us from Chicago. Nanous is a Palestinian Armenian DJ and producer from Detroit, with her current home, as I said, being in Chicago. Nanous aims to elevate the rich and diverse sounds of the Levant and North Africa by infusing them with a wide array of genres. Her goal is to carve out inclusive spaces where Arab and Swana folks can feel safe while enjoying their sounds. And she's also the co-founder of Go Baba Worldwide Party and Collective. Round of applause for our panelists. So we've created a few questions that I've directed at couple of like panelists each, but it is open. If anyone wants to chime in, feel free. I want to keep this very informal and casual because at the end of the day, it is a conversation amongst peers. So yeah, we'll do that for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of a break, and then Q&A. And I would love, like, if you guys would come up with some questions for our panelists. You have a really good opportunity and amazing artists and creatives in front of you, so would highly encourage some great questions. All right, without further ado, let's get started. All right, my first question I will direct for Nanus and Rowan. Art and music are and have always been political, and that's whether we realize it or not. And I think for many that might be a hot take. For me it isn't, but we can talk about that. They can be forms of expression under suppression, storytelling, and preservation under erasure and oppression. So both of you can expand on this a bit in regards to your own practice, for one as an artist, for Nanus as a DJ and producer. For Nanus, what do politics look like in the nightlife scene? And for Rowan, what do politics look like in the gallery?
Sure, I can start. Yeah, in terms of like politics, I think first off, everything is political, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And art especially is political because as creatives, we're working within what is currently happening. And so whether you're acknowledging what is happening around you or not is a political statement within itself. In particular within my art practice, I more so focus on, as you said in my bio, on like Palestinian culture and heritage and whatnot. And like just saying that it's Palestine on its own is a very, very political statement. It's acknowledging the existence of an ethnicity that is currently actively being erased through very violent colonial violence. And so the act of like making within an ethnicity that is actively facing such violence is a political act in itself. But also calling it what it is a political statement within itself, which is a form of resilience and resistance within that, because you're actively fighting against systemic erasure. And then I explore a lot of very like historically prominent Palestinian craft making, in particular embroidery work. Like tatriz, which is classically a cross-stitch style type of embroidery. And just like the act of making it, the act of trying to preserve it, the act of showcasing it and showing people this tradition that is held for hundreds of years, that I mean, I've been kind of reiterating what I'm saying over and over again, but that is a political statement in itself, because you're showcasing to people the existence of your family, your lineage, your ancestry through the act of cultural making. And then not only are you preserving it, but you're creating a dialogue and a narrative of a future within that craft, right? So one of the major things that happens within colonial violence is the erasure of cultural artifacts, or the stealing of cultural artifacts and claiming them as their own by colonizers. And so when you're preserving a craft, but also creating a future for that craft, you're therefore saying that no matter how violent you get, we're here to stay. I'll pass it on to you.
Hi guys, first I just want to say thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here. And in regard to the question, I think it's super important in the music world to talk about these things, because people just see what I do as just like, we're going to have fun, drink, and shake ass and go home, and people don't really see the depths of what it is and why I started doing this. I started doing this in Chicago specifically because there were no Arab or Swana people in the global club scene or the club scene period in nightlife. There were no DJs representing us. Our music was not being played out. We were not represented. And I loved going out and having a good time and going and seeing DJs. So that was something that I kind of like based all of this off of, was I wanted our representation. I wanted people to come and feel safe and feel seen and dance to all kinds of music, but even to hear our music and to feel represented in that way. So music and art and DJing is definitely political for me because it's a stance and saying that we belong here and we're not going anywhere. And yeah, like we deserve this too, just as much as anybody else. And the same goes for music production for me. I've been producing a lot of music with Chicago house legends, Detroit house legends, and putting a Palestine influence on the music as well. And it's all over streaming. It's a great way to just like push like a different kind of fusion of sounds together and show people again that we belong in this industry.
Thank you so much, Nanus and Rawan. I think continuing like what we were talking about in the music and nightlife scene especially, the next question is directed to Vanessa and Evidence Doll. And my question is, how has the music and nightlife scene changed in recent years, and maybe how hasn't it, and where do you hope to see it in the future? And for the other visual artists in the room, please feel free to answer that question in regards to the art scene in that industry as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. I really appreciate what you guys said, and we all went to a dinner beforehand, so we did get to talk a little bit about where we're all coming from. But we touched a bit about the status of nightlife. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay. Cool. As it stands, like globally, and then also here in Vancouver. So a bit on that, I guess, for me is that. When Made by We started, one of my fellow collaborators, Matt, is here too. Similarly, when we started Made by We, it was really out of this place of not necessarily not seeing our music, because we were hearing our music from the Black diaspora a lot, but not really being played by Black people. And I think here in Vancouver, where the Black erasure is like extra strong, that was really important for us to kind of like work really hard to just like have another option for people that care, because honestly, like not everybody does. And I think in terms of how the nightlife scene has like changed, it's been a lot harder to sort of differentiate between like who really cares like a lot about these like issues and like about the political, that I think for people like us on the panel, like it goes without saying, it is a part of our practice, it's a part of how we gather. But I think it's been really hard to sort of discern who the right people to collaborate are like with are. Obviously we also talked about like with the economy as it is, like nightlife is really hit really badly. And so in some ways it feels like a necessary evil to sort of work with some of these larger organizations despite not really sharing in that politics. So it still feels like it's really in a transitional space for me. And we talked a bit about, I can't remember, someone said like growing pains. I just feel like, Made by We started in 2019 and I kind of started DJing around the same time. It still feels like Vancouver is in that space of like, growing pains, but I guess I'd say I feel really lucky to have met like people like Evidence Doll, Malik, and like other collaborators in the nightlife space that do share like my politic, but it definitely is something ongoing that I'm kind of, constantly trying to weed out like, who's trustworthy, who's not, who's kind of for the movement and for the culture and who's not.
Hi, very glad to be here, very honored to be here, and I guess my perspective of the music scene has been that it has definitely grown within the last few years. I can definitely say that much, especially within a queer regard. There's a lot more spaces being created by and for queer BIPOC people. But to be very blunt about it, I think that there's a lot more emphasis on just like queer safe space rather than like an intersectional recognition where there's a lot of work to be done outside of the club, and we can't just talk about like the club is for us to like release and then we kind of just show up to the club, have barely any conversation and then go home, like even everybody here right now, like this is what we want to see, like this is how we want to move forward. We want to be able to have conversations with each other, have conversations for each other, and understand how that intersectionality and existing with other people who have different kinds of intersectionality really matters for us to understand each other's lived experiences. And like, I guess backpedaling maybe a little bit to the last question, as a producer as well, a producer and a DJ, there's a lot of genres that come from various different places that have all been extremely political in nature from the way that they were born, and especially a lot of genres that come out of Black American and BIPOC American in general. They come out of a very emotional and resistance-based place. There's a lot of history, whether you understand that or not, and I think past the fact that like you want to see people playing the music that come from their heritage and their culture, you also have to understand like why it existed, you know? Things matter in that regard, where you can't just think about something like, you know, I'm white, so maybe I shouldn't play like all of these genres like footwork and Jersey and only play things that aren't coming from, you know, places that maybe are, I don't know how to describe it, but I guess what I'm trying to say is being cognizant of where they come from and why they come from that, and instead of taking that, allowing yourself to be inspired by that, because I also don't think that we need to segregate our interactions with these kinds of things. I think I have been personally very inspired by seeing how these genres have been formed in the ways that I have produced my own music, and seeing how I can take a lot of the pain that I've experienced in my own identity and translate it the way that I've seen a lot of people in history, queer BIPOC people in history, do that for their own genres and the birth of those genres. So yeah, I don't know, I kind of rambled, but.
No, the rambling is perfect, don't worry. I think we were talking about creating and producing art, kind of getting inspired from your heritage, and also now kind of insisting on taking up space where historically we haven't been able to take up space. But it also brings up questions about representation and how sometimes that can be a double-edged sword, because then you have to deal with things like tokenism, or sometimes now you kind of feel like you're put in a box and there's a certain expectation of you as artists. And so I guess my question is how you kind of navigate identity, culture, and representation with those things that I mentioned, and so I like honoring your work and your identity. I originally had directed this question at Nanus and Evidence Doll, but honestly, like, I think this is a great open floor question. Like, for example, like, I always think for myself, like, am I an Arab artist, or am I an artist who happens to be Arab? Like, this is something that we've talked about before, right? So anyway, I think, yeah, please, open floor, if any of you would like to answer.
I mean, I personally just think it's like ridiculous in the DJ scene to play global sound but have no take on global issues. I think that that's really lame, and I think that your art is in vain to me. And I just wanted to piggyback on something you said. Like, something that people don't know is that techno music came out of Detroit. Actually came from Black working class Americans who just in the motor scene, just like playing with different car parts and motor parts and making sounds and then recording them, and then boom, techno was made. But like, I'm sure some of y'all didn't know that, and you just think techno is just like this European genre, like co-opted by white people. So definitely, like, the representation point is like very important for me still. It's the double-edged sword, but still, like, we matter, we belong, and I want to like share space. And then the other piece is like the collaboration part. I think that it matters like who you collaborate with. So I liked when you said that.
Yeah, Jada.
Is this on? So there's something that feels really important about what everybody's speaking to, and that is that we start with what is inspiring, and we draw on our ancestors, we draw on our people, and for a great many of us that comes through resistance. And so for myself as a weaver, so I do traditional Coast Salish weaving, and in 150 years ago, our weavings were done very traditionally, and then the government sent out the Indian agents and the RCMP to kill off all of our practices, and through colonialism, and our weaving was pushed underground, and our weaving was, the attempt to make it completely extinct, because it's part of how we pass on our politics. It's part of how we pass on our rights and title and our governance. And so, and I didn't understand actually what I was looking at when I looked at our own weavings from my own people. I just thought, well, those are really cool. I really like those. And then I was taught to weave, and then I started to understand actually what I was experiencing when I was weaving was that I was speaking to the past, and that the past was speaking to me, and that I was carrying all of those teachings. And I held that very, very dear, and we have all kinds of teachings and protocols that come through our weavings and with our weavings. And then I met one of my weaving mentors, and it fucking blew my mind, because I knew her, and I loved her, and she was like an old dear friend, because I'd been looking at her weavings for so many years. But actually, what I realized was that she had been speaking to me, and she'd been putting it down, and I'd been picking it up. And then I realized when I'm weaving, I'm not just speaking to the past, I'm speaking to the future. And so it actually is so important that we are cognizant of what we're doing, that it isn't just resistance, it is futurism, and that it is profoundly healing for our ancestors who weren't able to live out what we're doing. But it also is profoundly healing to the next generations, because this is part of the pathway. And so it is drawing on teachings and on ancestral knowledge, but it's also ensuring that we will not be erased by colonial violence.
And I guess touching on that, focusing on the future tip, I think that we're in a very special time right now in this transition space where, you know, there's a long way to go with a lot of the rights that we should have, basic rights, but I think that being able to be trans in this city and not nearly be as threatened as I would be in even the States right now, it has gotten me to really think a lot about how much representation matters, and especially being Arab and trans mask. I can barely even count on my hands the amount of friends that I have that are Arab and trans mask, let alone in this city. And I think that it's so incredibly important to be able to look at people who are like you and to see yourself in them, because it's such a cold and lonely feeling to not know who you are because you can't see yourself in other people as you're growing up as a kid. And being able to provide that for people feels like a very important, a very special, a very vulnerable thing that I almost feel like I have a responsibility to do, because we do need to take up that space. And like everybody has been saying, like that is an act of just showing how much our voice does matter and how much we have to just force all of the space that we deserve, because in this reality we're not going to be given it. We have to make that for ourselves, and we have to make that for each other. And moving towards the future, we don't know what that looks like for a lot of our intersections, and we have to somehow figure that out for ourselves and understand what that looks like. And we can only do that together by not being afraid to be who we really, really want to be. And to me, that's been something that I've just taken full force, because I have just understood that it took me so long to realize my identity, because I just didn't see that in anybody. And the moments that I did see that, it felt like the first breath of fresh air that I've ever been able to take. And if I can grow the balls to be that for other people, I really want to be able to create that space, because it's so incredibly important for the basis of our health and our intersectionality and building what our future looks like. As much as I don't think that, you know, I can build the future. We actively are. And it's really important to do that in the most true and raw form that we can.
Yeah. Sometimes I think because the process can be very slow, it's really hard to see kind of the fruits of your labor. But I think it makes a lot more of a difference than we think it does. Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's actually a really good segue, and it's a question that I have for Vanessa and Jada, and it's what does, like, I guess we could call decolonizing look like in the arts and creative spaces, and thinking about, because you were talking about kind of we're not given these spaces and not given these platforms, so we kind of have to like create them for ourselves. But it kind of, I'm curious about like how it is to navigate institutions while also being very like anti-institution, or kind of thinking about like the granting system. And earlier, you know, when I like asked about things like tokenism, it's like, how do I write a grant that honors like my identity that and my community that isn't giving them what they want to hear, for example. And I know, Jada, we've talked like in your written bio, you say you kind of resent the label of activist, and I was thinking like, where does activism or whatever that looks like fit in these contexts of like working within institutions while also dismantling them? Yeah. And again, any of you feel free to but yes, yeah.
Sure. So yeah, it's really difficult. It's really hard. I'm still working on it. I haven't worked in the like institutional art space for that long, but since I've started, that's been maybe like one of the main issues, especially because the Black Art Center is in Surrey, and one of like our value is to be like very Surrey centric, and kind of we're driven by this idea of like decentering like Vancouver as like the arts hub, because you know even that idea is like very colonial, like this downtown and like how everything is built around this like one center. We're really focused on like, you know, bringing people out to Surrey to see, you know, we were even talking about food at the dinner earlier, like, you know, just trying to just like decenter downtown Vancouver. I would say for myself, like I also have a very difficult relationship with the word activist. Like I'd probably like call myself an advocate. And I think because it's really difficult, like I consider that, you know, that term to be like very weighty and very serious. And I think like words matter. And so when I think of an activist, I think, I guess I think of someone a little bit different than what I'm doing, which is like sort of playing both sides. Like you mentioned grants, and the truth is like for myself, like what I've seen, I do find I kind of have to, I was gonna say, like, I shouldn't say the term like pimp myself out, but like definitely it's a bit of like a EDI checklist, and at the times that I feel like I don't want to play that game, I see the difference. Those usually are the grants that we don't get. So yeah, I think it's something that I'm still working through. But I think for me, like when I think about decolonizing, that's also quite a weighty term for me that I don't use maybe very freely or very lightly. But I think about connecting with like the Indigenous like leaders and like activists that we know in our network, in our community, on our advisory board, really relying on them when it comes to like our programming, how we just show up in the space. I guess as well, it's a bit difficult, but I think as a Black person, many of the ways that I was brought up like are a little bit anti-colonial in and of itself, just things that are natural to my community and like how we organize. Like this is a bad version, but for example, like we were talking about being late, like, you know, the panel was a little bit late. And like, I think like something that we do at the Black Art Center is for some of our programming, it's not quite so like hard start time, because we've noticed like, especially for Black youth, like coming in, like they trickle in from, if the start time is 5 o'clock, you know, the last person will arrive at like 5:30. So small changes like that that are kind of informed by like our actual community and what we're seeing, I think is a way that I try to put that into practice. And then also just being like kind of fuck you to the institution. Like it's just difficult because you need leverage to do that. And I kind of think maybe that's the piece that not everybody gets, and you can still do it, and I think people should still do it, but it's just like I'm saying, I see the difference of when you choose to do that, and then you might not get invited back, which sometimes is what you want, and sometimes you're like, damn, like where are we gonna get the money? So yeah, I guess, like I said, I'm still working on it.
You don't need to have an answer, but I appreciate it.
And I think for me, as you know, navigating the world of grants and navigating institutions, I'm really, really lucky because I have never in my life received a grant. I have applied for them and I have never been successful. and of any kind on any scale. And so I haven't relied on that. And that I don't make my living as an artist. I did for many years make my living as an artist, selling my paintings. And it was such a drag because I liked it so much before people started commissioning paintings. And then I just really didn't like it. And so I just went back to being a person who works in a job. And so now I work in a job and I be a job person. But when I'm alive, like when I'm most alive is when I'm in my creative self. And actually I think for me, art is not, there isn't one way for me to do art. I think there is a creative expression. And that I think since I was like really, really so small of a child, that I was using art as a way to survive in a world that was pretty hostile and not always very safe. And safe within my family and safe within my, with my community and in the world. And so art was a way that I could sort of touch down into softer places of expression. And it was accessible for other people to see something in me and that I was communicating. So, and actually, like there's a piece that I'm working on right now that I think it might be the most useless thing I've ever made in my life. And it's for sure the longest piece I've ever worked on. And it's because of Rawan, that Rawan taught me how to do tatriz. And so I am tatrizing a portrait of Aaron Bushnell, and I took a still photo of Aaron Bushnell early in his immolation, his self-immolation, and I pixelated the still, and then I am embroidering it, and it is the most meticulous and quiet love letter and meditation, and through it, I actually am sitting in prayer, and I am in a long conversation, and I've received so many teachings through being with this piece. So I've learned about fire and my own relationship to fire and my family's and the teachings of my people, but also of the people whose territory he was in when he self-immolated. And I've understood during what he allowed us to do was to witness him moving from Earthside into the realm of ancestors. And we watched that. And some of us watched it 100 times and couldn't stop watching it. And I actually, I felt like I had to explore it because I at first was feeling like, who is this like white young military guy and why am I relating so hard to him? And this is weird. And I just needed to interrogate that. And so I feel like that in itself, so it's not for other people to consume. It's not like it's never gonna go anywhere. It's not gonna like sell. It's not gonna make me anything. Like it's just this thing to do for the sake of doing it, and which feels like the most important relational piece for me to be well and whole, and to communicate, which is relationship with others, but also to communicate and understand the profound act of self-sacrifice and of love for Palestinian people. And Palestinian liberation. And so that to me feels like that's what decolonizing is those explorations and allowing ourselves the time to dignify those explorations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Vanessa, I get you. Like, I don't have an answer either, as well. Yeah, that was great. That exactly, I'm like, yeah. And I think, especially as creatives and artists, you're always like, at least this is for me, I'm always struggling between, like, I make something, you know, I feel good about it and I want to put it out into the world sometimes, but then you kind of start resenting it, like you were talking about, and because it gets consumed and it kind of loses its original, not purpose, but purpose for yourself. And then, yeah, and I think this is I don't think I'll maybe never will have an answer, but it's definitely an ongoing thing. I think maybe it's a perpetual thing as creatives of like what does art look like for myself, and what does it look like perceived by others. You also, we've touched a lot on resistance, and in the context of like art and music, and I am curious to know how you've all used art as resistance, or even asking the question, is art resistance for you? And I think, and I want to rephrase that question because we were talking about, and I think because it seems obvious the answer, we could say yes, but I mean more in the context of where does it look like from here on out? Like, I think, although we are all of us are coming from a background where none of this is new, like what kind of we can say, like October 7th, we always use that as a marker. It's been 75 plus years and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years for a lot of our communities, of history and erasure and whatnot. And yeah, I think, you know, we titled the panel, where are we now and where do we go from here? And I think when we talk about, like, you know, we say things like art is resistance, what does that look like, not just 1 year from now, but like lifelong? Does that, totally went off script, does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, I think that there needs to be a lot more like responsibility on the dance floor specifically in a nightlife scene, as a DJ. Personally, when I go to other events and there are DJs who have 300 plus, 100 plus, 50 plus, 10 people, I don't care, in the room, and you don't make bold statements about free, even just like a free Palestine, anything, and when you don't do that, you're normalizing my people's violence, basically. Because the genocide has just become like something like muted at this point after a year that people just like have shut it off in the music industry scene, where it just like whatever. And so there just needs to be a lot more responsibility, in my opinion, a lot more like, I have all these people in a room, I need to at least say something so people know how I feel and they know what's going on, and they know that Zionism is not accepted on the dance floor, for my DJ sets, for my party, for my collectives party, in any capacity. People say like, no racism, no xenophobia, no this, no that, no hate. I don't like, those are okay, but those are just giving like this to me. We need to just be very blatant with no Zionism is allowed on the dance floor, in my opinion.
In another way, I've been really understanding my relationship to art in a personal way to, I guess, figure out how to move forward in my own life, and how, I guess, what I want the future to look like. And my relationship with art is very cathartic. It's something that allows me to be so incredibly raw with myself and answer questions that I didn't even know that I had, and see things inside of me that I didn't know that I wanted, in ways that words just can't really comprehend, because words are really just one form of communication with yourself and with other people, and they can feel really, really limiting to me, because there's a lot of things that just don't really make sense for me to put into words, and it can get quite confusing on how it gets me to understand who I want to be, who I want the people around me to be, what I want to feel like, what I want to feel like around other people, in my own skin, in my community, what I want to see in my community. And there are a lot of feelings that I just don't find I can put into words, but I can put into music. I can put into a drawing, I can put into a tattoo, into somebody. I can do in ways that make sense to me. And it sounds a bit esoteric, but I think that art is a very useful tool for you to understand a lot more about what you want, because it can get as raw as you want it to be. And I've gotten so extremely raw with myself to a scary degree through art, because there are a lot of things I just didn't understand. I didn't have the words for, I didn't have the education for, and especially through my transition, there are things that just didn't make sense, that until I could look at the drawing I just did, I pieced it together and it started to make a little bit of sense, but I didn't see a reason why I needed to word it out. It's something that felt right in my heart and something that I knew I wanted to work towards. And I think understanding a bit more of how you want to feel can create a bit of a segue into what words you want to put to that. And using art has always also just been a form of release that you just can't really get by talking about things. Like, we can really only say this is so fucked up so many times until we have to release that feeling, because it has nowhere else to go. And asking yourself why you make art is so important. Like, really, why do you make art? Like, do you make art because you want to feel good about yourself? Do you make art because you want to look at it and think that you made something dope? We all do, but like, why does it feel dope to you? Does it feel dope because you think people are going to think that it's dope, or does it feel dope because that's something that you just said that you couldn't figure out how to say in any other way, and it looks like something that you've always wanted to make? If it's getting something out that you never thought you could get out, you know? Like, there's so many reasons why you would make art, and I think finding out the reason why I make art has been incredibly helpful for me to understand how I want to move forward in that, and what kinds of art I want to make, how I want to collaborate with people, how I want to see other people in their art, and what that collaboration looks like. Because without intentionality, how are you going to move forward with intentionality if you don't have the intentionality in your own art? Like, I need to find other people who have the same relationship to art that I do in order to understand how to put that to good use, you know? Otherwise, we're just going to constantly be in this loop of like, oh, I made something, it's not good enough, I'm going to take it down. Oh, it's not getting enough likes. Like, really? Like, we're in 2024. We can't be in that, bro. We really cannot be sitting there thinking about art as like, I need the validation. Like, you need to learn how to give that to yourself. Like, you need to, you have to give that to the people around you, and you have to understand why you make art, because once you click with that, you understand that you are getting out what you need to get out, because there's no other way to get that out. That's when you will feel that validation come in, because you can't get it from what it looks like. You have to get it from what it feels like inside of you. And if you aren't getting it from what it feels like, you have to find what it feels like, because you just haven't found it yet. So
I think, kind of piggybacking off of what you're saying, a lot of art is very process based. Like, yeah, there's the end result, but it's actually the process of making that provides something that can't be quantified through monetary value. The process of making and being within that creative space in itself is inherently an anti-capitalist act, because you can't measure it. You can't put it in a bottle and sell it. You can't, there's just no way to take that process, that authentic raw process of making from within yourself, of that expression, and provide it as a product. Yes, there is the end result of what you've made, but that process is so raw and so authentic, and it is a dialogue between the material you're working with and yourself and the world around you and what is happening. And that expression, I think, is one of the most raw and most genuine things you can do as a human being. I don't have much else to say, but I heard your words, and they spoke to me. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback too, because I really resonated with that as someone who just graduated from art school, and I can't reiterate enough, like, being in art school and feeling the pressure of like having an end result and then leaving, and now I'm like, oh, I make art for myself. Like, a lot of my art explorers also realized I don't think I introduced myself. I was so excited about them, I forgot about myself. I'm an artist and a community organizer, and I work a lot in Arab futurism is my research, and a lot of my practice involves printmaking and preserving the stories from my family and my ancestors. And that's something that October 7th happened, and I was the only Arab in my program, and suddenly everyone was looking to me to kind of create something based off how I was feeling, and I was like, art is my last thing on my mind right now. And instead of handing things in all year, I just kept making stuff at home and then just like showed them pictures. And I think for my professors who had to work in an institution and like kind of, I think it was difficult for them, but I kind of didn't care. And I think a lot of it was about just like I'm not doing this for you, it's purely for me and like preserving my family's history. And it's difficult, but yeah, I think we're also talking like you can't put stuff into words sometimes. Like, how are you supposed to explain what we're witnessing, what we've been witnessing? You know, sometimes you just gotta like use your hands and make shit. Like, sometimes that's it. But yeah, so thanks so much. Kind of everything's been an open floor question because I did get to know a lot of you and meet you for the first time, just like earlier. I'm like, all of you answer because I think all of you have amazing things to say. So the rest are all just open floor. This one, I've thought about this a lot, especially in the last year. And I think a lot of us have heard the term like joy is resistance. For those who haven't, one of the first people to coin that term was a poet. Her name is Toy Diricot, and she, in a poem, says joy as an act of resistance. And that's a phrase that's really shaped the relationship with social justice work, and particularly Black social justice and liberation work. But I was really curious to know, like, what does that mean for you as creatives, and what does that look like in your practice? I'm coming from a place of curiosity, just also because I think it's been co-opted a lot. So I'm just, please go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we did talk a bit about just like the various, social justice movements that have been like co-opted. Specifically, maybe like we see a lot of it in like the nightlife scene. From the Black perspective, like my understanding of that, specifically is like joy as resistance because, there was a time, I guess we're still in a time where we don't really see like Black joy that often. That's not like the main narrative that's like, or was like pushed or discussed like for much of my life and, previously. But I do wholeheartedly, believe in the idea and the concept, and like I'm sure all of us do. I think like kind of in line with like a lot of the themes, like I really liked what you said about interrogation and just like how art, is not just like a form of interrogation like for yourself personally, but like a way to like interrogate like the current climate as well as like kind of connect with like the past. So I guess for me, like there is resistance in that. And on the flip side, like, actually, speaking of Detroit, my friend Matt and I, we went to Dweller Music Festival, which is a Black electronic music festival in New York. And we saw a panel with Theo Parrish, who's like this OG, like Detroit DJ, techno DJ. And he said something about like people that look like me, like people that look like him, like dance for us, like we need it. It's a form of release. Like, and I really felt that because like, that just like has been true in my bones like forever. And so that to me is like something that's really closely tied to this idea of joy as resistance and makes this whole co-opting of like many of these, issues and political movements, especially in the dance space, like very triggering for me. Like it's very difficult to watch. And yeah, so I guess, listening to everybody and everything we've been talking about, it just also reminds me of what I was saying before about, I think it's all about discernment and like, you were saying like for art, like how raw and like formative it can be and like explorative, and I think that's so true for people like us. But you were talking about the clicks, and it's like in this current climate, like people are really incentivized to like be less genuine artists. Like I think people's relationship to art and like being an artist is just like so different now, and like not everybody really thinks about art the way that you described, and I think a lot of us do. And I'm trying to like take away the judgment from that, like genuinely, and just be like, we're just different types of people. But I guess it's really important about this collaboration piece to be like, in collaboration with people that I know have the same politic and like the same values as me. So like, in addition to maybe like saying Free Palestine on the mic, because like I love to hear that, but like I'm now seeing that from like people who I'm like, okay, I know that's not your politic, and you just kind of want like a moment because there's a camera. So I think it's really important to kind of like, if you live the practice, like it shows up whether you have to try or not. And so like when I think about who we collaborate with and like who I kind of like am like, oh, like we can share in this joy and know that it's resistance, it's people that I know are like like-minded, as opposed to like many people just like want to say that so they feel good about like going to the party. And I was kind of saying earlier, like, you can just have your party. Like, you don't need to make everything this sort of like grand declaration of, you know, a virtue signal or whatever. But again, I think it comes from people who are a bit insecure about like their knowledge and their understanding and like, you know, their like how they're rooted in these ideas. And I think like that can be a disconnect. So I just like really prioritize, you know, I guess like working with like-minded people and, you know, taking joy in that resistance with them.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please.
One way I've been thinking about one form of this concept a lot recently, just based on how I've been working and getting my money and doing a lot more art, not working like, you know, a job I don't want to work and just taking the credit debt that comes with that. I have been faced a lot with a lot of this guilt that I've plagued myself with that doesn't come from me, but this idea that I'm being irresponsible for gaining credit debt and putting a lot more effort into the art that I want to make that's been immeasurably important for my mental health and my identity and the person that I've become today, and there's nothing that I would trade for it. I'd get $20,000 on my credit card if it meant I could continue to do that stuff. Like, I don't care. That shit is so important to me, and I've been faced with really understanding how much this, like, routine misery is normalized, that, like, you should prioritize, like, of course you don't want to be broke, but, like, there's so much emphasis on, like, you have to have a job that makes you a certain amount of money, otherwise you're being irresponsible, or like there's something wrong with you, or you're making bad decisions in life. And that's just one way to live your life. It might make it more difficult for you to not have all of the money that you need to pay your bills in this specific moment of your life, but it'll make it a whole lot harder if I'm going to come back having an existential crisis every single day, because that's what I was doing when I was working jobs I didn't want to work. And to me, that's something that is so much more painful than looking at the fact that I have to scrape by and pay for my bills in whatever way that I can manage to. And to me, the joy that I get from allowing myself to make art that I want to make, that was meant to, like, useless art, which is just not monetizable or something that doesn't exactly take me to gaining money from that exact thing, is something that I've recognized to be so extremely important for my mental health. And if I don't do that, I start to, like, really lose my mind. But I would still guilt myself. And to this day, I'll message my friend, be like, I spend 7 hours producing instead of doing something that'll make me money. Like, I'm so stupid. And then I'm like, dude, that's important though. Like, that's for your well-being. Like, that's something inside of you need to get out. That is building to who you are and why you make art. But because it's not making me money, my capitalist brain is saying there's something wrong with you. You know, stay in that misery. Like, rob yourself of that joy so that you can continue to work under the machine. Like, allowing myself that joy of making the art that my heart actually wants to make, and obviously not overdoing it. Like, we do have the bills to pay at the end of the day, but, like, allowing that space to guilt-free work on that art and have that joy and not think that that's a bad thing because I'm not putting my energy towards other things is just something I've been having to face a lot in the last year because of the space I've been actively making for myself to have that. But I just still struggle with feeling bad about it, you know? Like, it's a hobby because you're just taught that art is not serious and it's not valued, you know? But that joy is so important in the ways that we connect with other people and the ways that we share and collaborate in that art. Yeah. It is extremely important, I guess, in the specific definition of resistance against capitalism and colonial mindsets.
Absolutely. Just quickly, I think because we're all running on BIPOC time today, I'm not sure. How do you guys feel? Like, are you okay not having a break? And is everyone feeling okay with that? Yeah, no break. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I think I'm going to skip a question just for the sake of time, because also in case anyone has questions. But I guess if there's anything, like, you want the people kind of not only listening today, but maybe even attending, like, the shows, like, what you want them to leave with as folks who, like, are creators, like, what, like, for people who are consuming, like, what what do you want the takeaway to be, and like if you have any like nuggets of wisdom or anything you just would like to leave folks with. Yeah.
I guess something for me that I've learned in the past year as a DJ navigating all of this is that I'm constantly sitting with this contradiction of like, you know, going out and DJing and, you know, showing a happy face, having a good time, but also at the same time being very deeply uncomfortable with the fact that I am DJing a party during my people's genocide. Like, both things are true at the same time of like, these people deserve this space, especially for me in Chicago. A lot of the people that come to my events are organizers. They're people that have worked all week to like do what they do, and then they need a space of release at the end of the week. That is true at the same time as like I am very uncomfortable with what I am having to do, and so I just want people to understand that like we're always living in contradiction, and I think just sitting with that and being uncomfortable with that and interrogating that is like extremely, extremely important. And not every time you see people like dancing and laughing that it's just like joy. Sometimes like I see my peers like they dance with tears in their eyes, especially like after this year. So yeah.
It's also totally okay if you have nothing. It's okay. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, please.
I guess on the tip of my relationship with making art, something I've been really understanding is how important it is if you want to have a deep, raw, and true relationship with making art, and to be able to validate yourself, you have to be okay getting uncomfortable with yourself. You have to be okay being honest with yourself, and you have to be okay creating that safety for yourself when nobody else can, because I think I see it a lot in myself and a lot of other people where you pine for this. You want people to see you through your art, and you want people to recognize who you are and what you want them to see, but you can't even see yourself because you're so afraid to look at that. You have to look at who you are and what that means and why you're making that art, and it can get so uncomfortable and vulnerable, but if you aren't ready to do that for yourself, with yourself, in your own safe space, it's going to be really hard to feel that from other people. And a lot of the time people will resonate, but it won't click with you if you can't provide that for yourself first. And I guess it's just a little push for me to keep pushing yourself to get uncomfortable. If you're comfortable in making art, you shouldn't be. You should push yourself to get a bit more uncomfortable if you want to get deeper with it, because it can really show you things you never thought you could see about yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have this thought about art being perfect, and that, you know, a little bit of what Rowan was talking about, that it's the process that is really the rich terrain, and the outcome is, it's not irrelevant, but I think it is a reflection of the process. And I'm just thinking about when my late dad was at the very last stage of his life and was living in hospice, and a lot of our family came to be with him. And I think my uncle at that time was like 84 or something, or 86. And my kid was 9 at the time, and my kid is a very prolific drawer, and my kid was drawing, and my uncle leaned over and said, "Oh, what are you drawing?" And my kid responded, and he said, "I don't think I've drawn anything since I was about 8 years old." And my kid was just like totally struck by that and said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, I think I was drawing a horse, and my teacher in school said it looked like a cow and that I hadn't done a good job, and I never drew again." And my kid was just gobsmacked by this. And actually, when I think about it now, I realize we all have a lot of power in each other's lives with the words that we choose and what we affirm for each other. But so my kid said, "Well, let's just draw a horse or a cow right now together." And so they did. They just sat with this little open book and did this thing. And It's a very lovely drawing. It is neither a horse nor a cow, and it does look like a child drew it, but it's drawn by an elder. And actually, so it tells this great story of courageously trying something, and also of tenderly tucking something away. And so I think for me, the idea of where did this idea come from that we should be able to have perfect output and outcome without practicing over and over and over? Like, we practice communicating in all kinds of ways before we consider ourselves skilled at it. And so why is art any different? And so whatever the means of art are, it is our communication, and with ourselves and with each other. And so it feels like in these times, in these incredibly dark times, when, you know, all masks are off, I think it's more important than ever to find the courage to sit in these conversations and to witness what each other are doing, even when it's not perfect.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I really felt everything that you guys said, and I feel like for me in my mind, they really all connected. And, you know, off of what you're saying about this like idea of perfect output, and like just to echo what you're saying, like I think about, you know, this whole like, you know, the Palestine conversation, like many of the other ones. I guess I really hear what you're saying about like people should also, I think, put less pressure on themselves to like get it right and get it perfect. And I really think like, much like you're saying about the process, which can be like very uncomfortable, and like you're saying, like just like, you know, basically like breaking anew, but like that's really where like that lifeblood, that energy is like located. And I guess like, you know, I think sometimes people can take that maybe too far and like, you know, lean on like a complacent sort of, you know, apathy. But like, if like you're saying, it's a terrible time, I feel like right now, to feel and to like watch, and like we were talking about the news, it just feels like never ending. And I guess I would also just like implore everyone to lean into that discomfort, both like creatively, like politically, like probably socially too. Like I think a lot of these things, like I was saying to these guys, I'm just really focused on like my community, like not being too much online and like getting stuck in that silo, and just think about like what are the conversations I need to have with like my neighbors and like the people that I know, my parents, my uncles. And like what you said about the hospice, my mom is like a nurse, and when she first became like an RN, she would like always come back and tell these like very heavy stories about like being with people in their final moments. But there was also like, you know, and I'm like kind of weird about death, like I've always been kind of weird about death, so this time has been like, you know, very like formative for me too. I think there's like just like so much to learn from that space, and it's a space that like in general like society is quite scared of and tends to like shy away from. So yeah, I guess I would just say like look into that, and like even in terms of futurism, like we've all been talking about futurism, it's very like basic kind of giving like pop feminism, that early activist kind of eco stuff, but like I really believe like we're not doing work for us, like we're doing work for like, you know, people's children's children, and like that really means something. Like I try to think about that just as like vivid as your kind of connection through your weaving was with like your ancestors. Like I try to really connect with like whatever the future version is of like our ancestors, and like really believe that like every like shitty day, like I'm really like, okay, but we like keep going, we keep resisting, so that like maybe they have to resist a little bit less.
Yeah, absolutely. No one, no pressure. No, honestly.
I feel like I can't compete. Y'all said everything.
We can also jump right into the questions if you,
No,
yeah.
it's okay. I think that notion of working within future generations and that idea of futurism, I think is integral to the language of hope, and envisioning a future. That act in itself of seeing a future for our communities is so critical and so important, because we are living through times where we are actively being told that we have no future. And, you know, to our siblings back home in Gaza and all of Palestine, who are actively facing that ongoing erasure, that notion of having a future and building towards that future is so integral and so important, because the work doesn't end when Palestine is free. The work continues to rebuild Palestine. The work continues to rebuild Turtle Island. The work continues to rebuild all the damage and harm that has been done to our families for generations. And it's going to take generations of rebuilding and doing generational healing to get to where our children's children need to be. And I think one of the incredible things about art and the act of making art is you're making, despite all the violence and the harm and everything that is currently happening, and you're making for the sake of there to continue to be a future. And that, you know, that idea of seeing a future can be really difficult at times. But I think if we are collectively, through intersectionalism, working on that with all our communities, through the act of making and continuing to hold on to our humanity, and continuing to challenge the apathetic norms that we are continuously facing, that future is more than possible. About a week ago, I had a really boring dream. I have a point to this, I swear. I typically have very vivid nightmares, but for the first time in a long time, I had a really beautifully boring dream. And I was back home, living in Ramallah, in a free Palestine. And I went on a weekend to go visit my family in Haifa. Nothing substantial happened, nothing entertaining, nothing. It was a very boring dream. But I knew it was a dream the second my family introduced me to their cat, because they would never get a cat. And that's when I woke up, because I was like, there's no way they would ever adopt a cat. No, my Arab family, never. But waking up to that dream and that notion of mundaneness, everydayness, the idea of just going to go visit family and seeing them and having this clear vision of that free Palestine amongst this genocide, 76 years of ethnic cleansing, displacement, occupation. I think holding on to those things and making and building towards a mundane, everyday life, there is so much incredible beautifulness within that. Yeah.
That was incredibly well said. You were worried for nothing. That was beautiful. Thank you, Rowan. Yeah. Yeah, I think just quickly, we always talk about futurisms, and I think sometimes people forget that when we think about future, it's not the sci-fi, hyper-techno future. Sometimes it's a future where we can just, like, not just survive, but thrive. Yeah. Really hard to transition from that. Wow. No, it's okay. Because we're running a bit behind, we'll still take a couple questions if that's all right. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, we'll take just a couple. If anyone's having some really hot questions they want to ask, please feel free.
I also have one more thing to add before.
Oh,
we
yeah.
get into
Please go
questions.
ahead. Yeah.
I've just been thinking about, one of my friends told me that words are spells, and I really do believe that. The words that you tell yourself really manifest into your reality, no matter how silly you might think that is, because I used to think that, but what you tell yourself truly really shapes your reality and the ways that you react to the things around you. And that stays true for how you see your future. And doesn't matter how far in the future that is, what you believe, it's not gonna magically make things pop up, but like it changes all the micro ways that you interact with your community, the things that you do, and those little things are what can alter your fate in some regard, you know, even if it's in your own relationship with yourself, if it doesn't create groundbreaking differences in the ways that the world, you know, shapes itself around you. I really just do believe that words are spells, and I guess it can still go back to what I was saying before about your relationship with yourself, your art making, and your community. What you tell yourself will manifest. So if you keep telling yourself you're not worth taking up space, you'll always feel like you're not worth taking up space. Nobody can change that. Nobody can tell you you're awesome enough that all of a sudden you will feel that way. So even if you don't believe it, you fake it till you make it, because you have to trust me. You have to trust me on that one. It really is important.
Actually, before questions, let's get a round of applause for the panelists. I think it's always like, it's incredibly valuable to be able to listen to not just peers, but people who are doing incredible things within their communities. So I hope you all like leave feeling as, although it's difficult, like feeling like you're kind of, we're gifted a lot of amazing knowledge. Yeah, all right. Is that mic working? Yeah, awesome. So yeah, if you have a question, please feel free, just go up right to the mic. I also can't see the crowd, so you're gonna have to make yourself very visible. Not a single question. Nada, please. Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for being so authentic and raw. It's really a great pleasure to work with all of you. A question that I have that I always reflect on in my own work is, how do we grapple with some of the internalized colonization that we have when we go off and build our own communities? And how do we ensure that we're not perpetuating some of these harmful cycles of like hierarchical community building and just stepping away from these ideals that have caused our communities harm? It's an open question for anyone.
And a really great question. Thank you.
I can start. I just guess, thanks for the question. Thanks for organizing this. Thank you to also Nora. This was great. I guess I would say, like, I feel like collectively, but specifically in like the organizing space, especially, I'm sure, you know, many of us would agree in the party space, people need to like not be so scared of conflict. Like, basically, like, that will happen. Like, we were all brought up in these systems, and like you said, for years and years and generations, like, you know, even the best of us, like, it's, you know, we're indoctrinated in a lot of these ideas, like in white supremacy. So I think we're kind of in this space where everybody's really scared of getting stuff wrong, and like, for sure, like, I wouldn't legitimize like cancel culture, but there's definitely like a call out sort of culture that I think happens. And I guess I would say, like, relying on, again, like your community or like fellow collaborators. Like, I know, of course, if like some random comes up to me or is like DMing the Made by We account, like unfounded, and this has happened to us before, like claims of, let's say, anti-blackness or other issues, maybe not so legitimate, but people who I know are doing good work and share space with me in my community, if they come up to me with an issue, I'm gonna take it seriously, and I'm gonna be open to sort of like that dialogue and that conflict. And I think people need to remember, like, conflict is like first of all, like, goes with community. Like, if you're in community with someone, conflict is a part of that, because we're not all always gonna agree or see the same, like, you know, perspectives. But I also think, for me, I really see like conflict and, you know, healthy confrontation is like a kind of love. Like, if I care about you and I want you to be able to continue like working and enjoying, like, I'm gonna tell you, like, I'm gonna be real with you. It's gonna be kind, and it's gonna be like caring, and, you know, taking into consideration where you're at. But I think it's really important that people kind of rely on each other for that sort of like, you know, needle point, like, to find out where you're at.
Yeah, I think it's also about understanding progress over perfection. We're not going to get things right all the time, and the willingness to receive critical feedback essentially like letting go of the ego and unlearning hyper-individualism and more communal ways of thinking is so integral to community building and organizing. And it's hard, it is not easy, and the act of calling in is an act of love, absolutely. And I think learning the act of calling people in and learning how to receive being called in is such an integral part of continuing to be able to move forward. Because so often that we see is a lot of infighting, and then from that infighting, organizations break apart, movements fall apart, and they don't proceed forward. And so the only way forward is to acknowledge that we're not going to always get it right, and that's okay. But what we do need to get right is how to receive critical feedback and not to take it on a personal level.
I think also like not being afraid to seek out that feedback as well and check in if you're in a space where you're unsure, because a lot of us are always in spaces where you're kind of like, how do I move about this one? I don't really know. I don't want to offend anybody, and I feel like a lot of us just get afraid to face the fact that we might offend somebody, so we just avoid bringing it up, avoid doing anything about it at all, but instead going up to somebody that might have a good lived experience perspective on it and saying, hey, if you have the capacity, I'd love to check in with you on this. This is where I'm at. This is how I want to move. Like, please let me know. Like, I want to learn. I don't feel like I have enough of a perspective to, you know, understand what may be the best way to go about this. So, like, from your intersectional perspective, can I get your feedback? Like, I want to learn, you know, and also just actively unlearning, which is a very active thing. You can't just like sit there and tell yourself, I'm not homophobic, I'm not transphobic, I'm not like anti-black just because I believe that black people should have rights. Like, there's a lot for you to unlearn, for you to claim that you've unlearned all of that stuff. And if you're not actively doing that work, which should feel kind of like homework, like you're sitting there and actually thinking about it, it's not a passive effort, then you aren't really moving forward, you know. And I feel like it can be very overwhelming to understand like what to unpack, but a way that I feel like I've been able to understand how to go about it is looking at in the ways that I engage with creativity, like what inspires me, what do I benefit off of essentially, and a lot of it is a lot of like black creatives art, and I've been trying to put a lot of effort in my own work and my own understanding of like how to give back and take up space, because I am taking up space by engaging with black art and black derivative art, and I want to be respectful of that, and I don't want to just tell myself that like I deserve to just engage with whatever I want to because I'm just being inspired. Like, I also just want to learn. You should use your inspiration as something that should motivate you to learn more, because that should also inspire you. Like, that education aspect should be something that ignites a bit of a flame in you, because it gives a lot of substance to what you're engaging with, you know, and continuing that in ways that are relevant to your life can give it a lot more meaning rather than just learning to learn so you just feel less problematic, you know. Like, look at the areas of your life that you think could be beneficial to unpack and start there.
Yeah. If it's okay, yeah, also thank you so much. And if it's okay, if there's one more question, we'll move on, just because we have amazing artists lined up after this, and I want to make sure that they have an amazing audience. Any questions? Yeah, please.
On the topic of keeping queer art alive, like, how do we do that? Because in the nightlife space, it's so like single generation kind of. Like, you go to a party, it's like the Gen Z party or like the millennial party. Like, do we need more nightlife that's like intergenerational, or like do we just need like third spaces for dialogue with other generations?
That's a great question. I was like, yes, yeah.
I mean, I think one thing that would be really helpful is having third spaces, like not just seeing each other at the party, because there's so much like social, like clout, you know, it's like, how cool do you look? Like, who are you with? Like, who's DJing? Who's going to this party? Like, what are you doing at this venue? You know, like, there's a lot of surface level stuff that comes with that, and a lot less space and time and energy, because they're also not always sober. Like, there isn't as much connection as if we're like connecting in the daytime doing anything else, you know, alongside those like nightlife events. I think if we just had other ways to connect, we could bridge a lot of those gaps. But
Yeah, I also really agree. I do think like we just need a lot of third spaces that are really queer friendly and like queer engaged, like led by queers. I also am like really big on intergenerational relationships in general, like, you know, professional, social, like, and I think the party scene is like, especially in Vancouver, deeply really needs that. Something that I love about going to America is like, that's like a lot more common there. Like when we go to New York, like, you know, there's like people that, you know, you'd be surprised that they're still really turning up, like for real. So I guess like, yeah, I'm not really sure like how to do that. We talked a little bit about the dinner. Like, I think there needs to be a reshuffling sometimes of these lineups. It's often like the same people all the time, and I think that's more again on like the organizers to be sure that we're like, you know, activating new talent and like different types of talent, like from different generation demographics too. But yeah, great question.
Yeah, if I can answer that as well, I think we have so much to learn from not just your peers, but like people who have like been through it. And I think sometimes, like, especially in the nightlife scene, as like someone who organizes events, like we always face this issue where it's like you can't please everyone, but the more inclusive you make your events, whether that's like more queer friendly, more like diverse, more BIPOC like voices, talent, but also like the way you market things, the way you like talk about things, the way you showcase like your talent, like maybe it's not always cool. That's something I feel so stupid to say, but like, I have so much to learn from the people in my life, and all of them are like much older than me, and they learn from me as well. And I think like you're not better. You're also gonna age one day, you know, and you will pass down the wisdom that you've learned, and that's whether that's a year from now or 10 years from now, it's all valuable. Yeah. Sorry, guys, took up your space. But yeah, so I don't think there's any more questions. If you're really dying to ask a question, find one of us later. But yeah, we really want to get to the rest of the program. There's an amazing lineup curated by Nada here. I highly encourage you to stay to the end. I think Nanus is closing us down tonight.
Yeah, so we actually have like an incredible mix of mediums of artistic expression from the Swana region. So we've got DJ Mikobat followed by Saba Amarian band with lots of Persian jazz influences. Then we've got performance art from Amnesia Hayes and Farah's exploring themes of actually, I won't ruin the surprise. Just watch. And then we'll have DJ Nanus closing us off. So please stick around if you're able to. And it was really lovely sharing this space with you and having you be part of it.
Thank you so much, everyone.